So hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us for Autism Recognition and Response for Law Enforcement and Other Professionals. I'm Alison Anderson, and I'm an education coordinator in the Children's Mercy Autism Clinic. You may be wondering a little bit about me and how I'm qualified to teach you this information, which Raneem already gave me. I already gave you a little rundown of my credentials. Just to share a little bit more, yes, I thought I was going to school to be a social worker. In fact, I was, and I got a degree in social work and promptly went into law enforcement. That, however, is where I discovered my love for educating law enforcement about autism and just connecting the two communities. So after 15 years in law enforcement, I went back to school and got a master's certificate in autism spectrum disorders. I renewed my social work licenses and retired from law enforcement, went in search of the dream job, hopefully working in the special needs population as a social worker, or ideally educating people about autism. In 2021, I was able to come from DCF, the Department for Children and Families, where I worked as an investigator for child abuse and neglect. And I came to Children's Mercy in 2021. I transferred to the autism clinic almost exactly a year ago. So all that to say that it's been a 7-year journey to get here, but I'm finally in my dream job and really happy to be here. So thanks everyone for coming. I would argue my biggest qualification is that I'm a mom of 2 boys with autism. You can see here on the left, my Nick. He is 18 years old. He graduated from high school in May, and now he attends the 18 to 21 program with his high school. And Nick is a kiddo that has higher support needs. He's always going to require assistance throughout life. On the right here, you can see my 16-year-old Max, and he is a junior in high school, also diagnosed with autism. He takes typical classes with his peers and he drives, and he's an excellent driver because he's a rule follower, as so many of our kids are. He does need some support and accommodations in school, but this is just one example of how 2 people with the same diagnosis, even the same genes, are wildly different and amazingly different. This is an informational presentation and not meant to replace tailored guidance for a child and family provided by a qualified professional. Examples provided here may not be appropriate for the specific work you do. Views expressed here are not necessarily those of Children's Mercy Kansas City. So these are the 3 main objectives we're going to cover today. You'll notice I generally won't read slides out loud to you because I know you can read them. I just more like to explain things in layman terms and give real life examples from personal and professional experience. During this presentation, I may refer to individuals as autistic, as having autism spectrum disorder, ASD, on the spectrum, someone with autism. A lot of times I say my kids or people like my kids or our kids. And please understand that autism is a wide spectrum. Every person with autism is different. So by no means am I ever saying that all people with autism do the things represented in this presentation or that everything applies to all people with autism. Why do we need to teach law enforcement about how to interact with people on the spectrum? Well, and you can see the rate of autism is continuing to increase. Right now, 1 in 36 children in the United States have autism, and 1 in 45 adults have autism in the US. And just to give you an idea of where we've been, when my kids were diagnosed around 2008 to 2010-ish, The rate of autism for children was 1 in 110. So we have gone to 1 in 36 from there. So I imagine that many of you taking this course have either been touched by autism in your personal lives, or maybe you've interacted with someone on the spectrum, whether or not you knew it, during a call for service or professional contact. And law enforcement does have more contact with the autistic community. People with autism are 7 times more likely to have contact with law enforcement than their neurotypical peers. And we will review why that is here in a few slides. So we're at objective 1, which is key characteristics to know in an emergency. Again, not going to read these all, but we will talk more extensively about them. I do want to highlight a couple that are pretty important for law enforcement and other professionals. People with autism may lack an understanding of real danger, which can put them at high risk. For instance, someone with autism may exit a car after an accident or even at a stoplight and run directly into traffic, or go back into a burning structure to retrieve a desired item. They often do not have that innate fear that keeps us safe. In general, your contacts will likely take longer and require more patience. And people with autism often display unusual responses to sensory input, which we will discuss what that means in future slides. So to start with, what is autism? It is a neurodevelopmental disability, a brain-based difference that typically appears in the first few years of life and interferes with everyday functioning. Genetics do play a role. However, there is no single autism gene. And a recent study out of UC Davis Health verified that if you have a child with autism, you are more likely to have a second child with autism. In fact, you're 20% more likely. So we won the lottery on those odds in my family. And this is a little in the weeds, but I think it's important to know. We're going to talk about the DSM-5. What is that? It is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This is the handbook used by healthcare professionals in the US and much of the world as the authoritative guide to diagnose mental disorders. Under the DSM-4, as you can see, there were different types of autism diagnosed, including PDD-NOS, which is pervasive developmental delay not otherwise specified, what my children were diagnosed with. The one you probably recognize the most is Asperger's. And previously, people with Asperger's were known to be very intelligent. They sometimes might be referred to as a little bit of an odd duck just due to differences in social communication and interactions. However, the DSM-4 is out of date and the DSM-5 has updated what we call autism. People are no longer diagnosed under any of the previous names. They're diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder with varying support levels and needs. Asperger's is no longer a diagnosis, although you may still hear people reference Asperger's or say they have Asperger's, especially if there's someone that was diagnosed under the DSM-4, or if they just feel like that's a simpler way of kind of communicating where they are on the spectrum. So 2 symptom criteria are looked at for diagnosis. This is the social communication and interaction and restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, and activities. People with autism often have trouble with nonverbal communication and a wide range of social interactions or activities that include an element of play or banter. So people with autism can be anywhere from hyperverbal, like they don't stop talking, especially about a subject of interest to them, or they can be nonverbal or in between. And we will talk a little more right here about the diagnostic criteria and what it means. So, persistent deficits in social communication and interaction across multiple contexts. What does that mean? It means that people with autism may have an abnormal social approach. They may have reduced sharing of emotions, failure to initiate or respond to social interactions or bids. Often, people with autism have difficulty with verbal and nonverbal communication, including body language, gestures, and facial expressions. They may have a flat affect or a lack of facial expression, and they often do not understand cues. So, for instance, if they're trying to be friends with someone and the friend is ignoring them or turning their back to them or something like that, they may not understand that as a cue that the person does not want them around or doesn't want to be friends. They may also have trouble participating in imaginative play, making friends, or they may have no interest in friends. As far as restricted, repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, and we're going to talk more in layman terms about all of this, but it is basically repetitive motor movements through the use of objects, or it can be through speech, repetition or scripting of phrases that are irrelevant to the situation. You can see hand flapping, lining up of toys, stacking of objects. People with autism may also become highly distressed at small changes in their routine and have a lot of difficulty with transition. So they may need to do certain things at certain times of the day, or they may only eat certain foods. And if you interrupt their routine, that can escalate them. We will talk more about the highly fixated interests, but it does mean a strong attachment or preoccupation with unusual objects, and it may be inappropriate for the age range of the person. Often, people with autism may show indifference to pain or have adverse reactions to sensory stimuli like specific sounds or textures. They may have a fascination with lights or moving objects, but we'll go more into detail here in layman terms. What's this mean? Okay. So, for restricted repetitive patterns of behavior, interests, or activities, we just talked about how you can see this sometimes in hand flapping, finger posturing, flicking of fingers. Like I said, the repetition of verbal phrases that are not relevant to the situation at hand, and many other things. This is also known, self-stimulatory behavior is also known as stimming. And it can be self-soothing or indicate excitement or could be a response to overwhelming sensory input. And what is sensory input? It's like touch, sound, and smell. So, for instance, someone with autism might seek out touch, like hugging strangers, because they like that touch pressure of the hug, or running into things intentionally. That would be my son running into the wall and bouncing off of it and really enjoying that. Um, we also talked about how people with autism often have a very high pain tolerance. So they can be injured and not realize how injured they are. In trauma situations, people with autism may not be the best reporters of their injuries, so it's probably best to go ahead and have them checked out. As far as sound, this is what really helped me understand sensory input and sensory overload. I didn't understand sensory things until an adult with autism described certain noises as feeling like a cheese grater on his brain. So loud noises or even certain touches or smells, things like that can be physically painful and overwhelming to someone with autism. Imagine trying to answer even simple questions while you have the feeling of a cheese grater on your brain. That would be really difficult. And sensory overload is real, even for people without autism. If you think about it, have you ever been at an event, like, say, a wedding reception with lots of people? It's loud. Maybe people are drinking. They're talking over each other. There's music going, people laughing, glasses clinking, and you can't even hear yourself think or have a conversation with someone else. It's just overwhelming and too much. Well, we can remove ourselves from that situation. We can go outside and take a break and get a breath of fresh air until we're ready to come back in. We can leave the reception. And people with autism might be so triggered by the sensory input that they have a meltdown, and they may be unable to share how they feel and be unable to remove themselves from the situation. So they may engage in stimming to help cope. Again, a lot of people with autism, especially little kids or kids in general, have no real fear of danger. And we are going to talk about this extensively. So how high of a pain tolerance are we even talking, right? I'm going to give you one example out of many. This is my son, Nick, right here, age 14, I believe. So this was December of 2019, day 2 of not feeling well. Day 1, he said his tummy hurt and he did vomit twice. He went over to grandma and grandpa's while dad and I worked, and they said he slept. He didn't vomit again. He seemed to be doing better and on the mend. Well, the next morning, he also told me that his stomach hurt and he also vomited again. Something about his affect, the way he was acting, concerned me. It wasn't typical for him. So I'll spare you all the details about how we got there, but we were admitted to Children's Mercy with a ruptured appendix. And the doctor said when they did the surgery that it appeared to have been ruptured for 2 to 3 days. So he had surgery to move his appendix. He was released on Christmas Eve at 7 p.m. He returned 36 hours later and was readmitted because he had pockets of infection throughout his abdomen from all the goo that came out when his appendix ruptured. So he had another surgery with drains inserted. He stayed until we were finally discharged on January 4th, excuse me. And this is how he looked when we were released, negative 29 pounds. That is what I would call a high pain tolerance. When we talk about highly restricted, fixated interest, abnormal in intensity and focus, any ideas what Nick's special interest might be? Yeah, if you guess puzzles, you're right. Always has been puzzles. We have them all over our house. He can do 4,000-piece puzzles in a week or less. The only issue is that he wants to keep them all. He wants us to mat them and hang them all up. So we are running out of room. But he also has lots of side interests. So currently and previously, he's loved all things princess, Barbie, Disney, Mario, and more. If you met him today, he would probably immediately subject you to an interrogation about the Flintstones. which is his new thing, and Disney and all that. And he would expect you to know your stuff. So when we're talking about attachment to objects and interests that may not be age appropriate, think about an 18-year-old boy bringing a Barbie doll everywhere with him. Most 18-year-old boys are not going to be carrying around Barbies, right? That's not age appropriate. Any idea what Max's special interest is? He has always been a dog lover, and you can see we've had dog birthday parties. We take our dogs to lunch. He actually purchased this dog stroller with money he got for his 16th birthday for our Frenchies who can't walk very far without falling out, so they can still enjoy the dog park. And as you can see here, he proudly pushes that stroller around the dog park. He is everything dog. His room is decorated with dog stuff. He'll go anywhere if it has to do with dogs. He'll wear any clothes having to do with dogs. He even has personalized socks with pictures of his actual dogs on them. And he plans to get a vehicle that can easily transport, you guessed it, dogs. And his special interest has pretty much been very specific to dogs his whole life, with a few things here and there on the side. We discussed that people with autism are now just diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder with different levels of supports. So there are 3 levels that are diagnosed. Level 1 is considered to be the level that requires the least amount of support, or, and I don't particularly care for this term, but the higher functioning is level 1. And level 3 indicates that the person needs extensive support in the areas, or if you want to say they are more severe. And people can receive a different level diagnosis for both symptom areas. So a person can have, say, level 1 autism for the area of social communication and interaction, but be a level 2 for restrictive, repetitive behaviors, etc. We don't really focus too much on the levels, honestly, because they don't highlight a person's strengths, and they can change and ebb and flow with development, age, and therapy. It's really just a snapshot in time of when the person was diagnosed, where they were on the spectrum. This is a very popular saying in the autism community. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So that's to say that no 2 people with autism are the same. They can be anywhere along these spectrums, from being nonverbal, non-speaking, like I said, to hyperverbal, and they can be nonverbal and gifted. Nonverbal doesn't always mean impaired intelligence. They may be able to communicate in other ways, like sign language or writing or using alternative communication devices. So don't assume because someone can't speak that they have intellectual disabilities. And it is, yeah, they can be nonverbal, they can have intellectual delays, they cannot understand or care about social interactions, and really everything in between. Objective number 2 is how to best communicate. And again, I'm not going to read these all to you. These are all excellent examples in really any situation, but especially during encounters with someone who has autism. If you are an officer and you have taken any type of CIT, crisis intervention training, you've probably already learned a lot of this. Some important things to know about autism: do not give multiple directions all at once, or repeatedly fire questions at the person, as this might overwhelm them. Think again if, say, you're hearing the police officer sirens and you have that cheese grater on your brain filling, and someone is shouting directions at you or questions, that would be very, very hard to respond to. Use short phrases like stand up now, wait for the person to do it, and then give another direction. Say what you mean and mean what you say, because people with autism are generally extremely literal. So try not to use slang. For instance, this is just a little simple example. Say you're on a stop with someone, they're moving around a lot. You may say something like, why are you moving? Why are you so jumpy? Do you have ants in your pants? Or something like that. Someone with autism is going to be like, no, I don't have ants in my pants, because they are so literal and they literally think that that's what you mean. And that can come across as kind of like being a smart aleck. Think about when I said earlier that you can't hear yourself think in certain situations. Again, the literalness of that. People with autism might not understand that. How do you hear yourself think? I mean, you don't think out loud, so how would you hear it, right? Super confusing. Also, a lot of people with autism don't understand personal space or the invisible bubble that many people have that is a buffer, that personal space. So they may come close to you quickly for many reasons, including if you're a first responder, that you may be their special interest. And that is not an uncommon thing for people on the spectrum to have special interests in first responders. So they may be just super excited to interact with you and very interested in shiny objects on your uniform, like your badge and your gun. And just a quick example, Nick has a buddy who has a first responder special interest. He recently had his first seizure ever. And so mom called an ambulance, of course. He woke up in the ambulance and was terribly excited to see the medics, to be in the ambulance, and to get to tour all kinds of stuff after the situation was over. He doesn't reference the seizure at all, but he sure does talk about the ambulance ride and the things he saw a lot. And yes, we've established there are communication challenges with autism. If we add an emergency situation to that, things can go downhill quickly. So remember, a person with autism may not answer a question that you ask them at all. They might not look you in the eyes. And if you're in law enforcement, you're trained to recognize cues of the neurotypical population. Well, that may be true if people don't make eye contact or have fleeting eye contact, and the neurotypical population, that may be an indicator of lying or deception. But for people with autism, often there is not eye contact or very minimal eye contact. And this has nothing to do really with their guilt or innocence. It is just a hallmark of autism. And the communication challenges make it difficult to understand what's needed or if someone's hurt or in trouble. Again, remember they can lack fear and have no real sense of danger. Often I saw that while working in law enforcement, the public would encounter someone with autism, either say walking on the street or on the sidewalk at a park, in a convenience store, something like that. And they would see all kinds of things. Maybe the person's making loud noises, the stimming noises. Maybe they're overly friendly, trying to hug. Maybe they're making odd hand movements or not making sense or just not responsive at all to the person. So often people mistake these cues for autism as someone who's mentally ill or using drugs. So when you respond to those types of calls, if safe and possible, I'd recommend that you observe from a distance safely and consider whether or not you could be dealing with someone who has autism. Objective 3 is being prepared to manage the sensory climate to de-escalate behavior. We already talked about sensory issues. What is sensory? Sounds, smells, touch. So to de-escalate contacts, if safe and possible, turn off your lights and sirens. Clear the area, if possible, of people, extra personnel, neighbors, looky-loos, anyone that does not need to be there. And remember, people might be feeling physical pain due to their sensitivities, like the lights or the sounds of the sirens, and be unable to even really hear directions. If people are stimming or doing repetitive behaviors, don't make them stop unless they're doing something unsafe. Of course, we don't want someone hitting themselves in the head repeatedly. That's not good. But otherwise, stimming is generally used as a coping mechanism. It can also indicate excitement, or it can indicate being overwhelmed. So if you discourage the stimming or try to make it stop, you are likely going to escalate that person. If you see someone holding an object, remember the inappropriate attachment to objects, right? Even if it's not appropriate for age. I know a young man in his 20s who loves Barney. He carries around stuffed Barneys with him. That is his comfort. So if you're an officer or you're a first responder going to one of these calls and you see that someone's holding something that you're pretty certain is not a weapon or something that can be used to harm anybody, don't take it away from them, because again, you're going to escalate the situation. And if possible, do not touch or restrain someone with autism at all. It really should be the last resort, restraint. The best method is geographical containment. So to control and calm people with autism, for instance, if you can contain them to, say, a fenced-in yard or a room that's been deemed safe or a patrol car or something like that, that is much preferred to actual restraint, physical restraint. However, if you do have to restrain someone with autism, something to keep in mind is that many have underdeveloped trunk muscles. So turn them on their side, make sure their airway's supported. And also up to 40% of this population has seizure disorders. If you have to take someone to jail that has autism, let the jail staff know they have autism. Suggest an isolation area, or if your jail has a special management pod, that's perfect for someone with autism because they are going to be at high risk for abuse and other things from other inmates. So we don't want them exposed to that. Elopement and wandering. If you're in law enforcement, you have probably responded on a call like this. About 50% of children with ASD will elope. About a third of those cannot communicate their basic information. And 71% of deaths that occur after an elopement occur from drowning. A study was done on siblings to compare typically developing siblings to their sibling with ASD. And that's where we came up with the number 49% of the siblings with ASD will elope. That means we know it's not an indicator of neglect necessarily or bad parenting. it's an indicator that someone has autism and they are likely to elope for many reasons. Elopement is also sometimes called wandering or bolting or running. It's very, very dangerous. It happens for lots of reasons, as you can see. Um, and there's a lot of danger associated with elopement for individuals with autism. The reason drowning is the highest cause of death during elopement is people with autism are often highly attracted to water, very highly attracted. And remember, they don't have that innate sense of fear, right? So they will go into a lake or a pool or a body of water, even if they can't swim, because they're not connecting that that could end in drowning. Also, exposure to the elements is a risk, being struck by vehicles, and of course, encountering people that might try to take advantage of the person. If you're a first responder and you get an elopement call, first of all, check a special needs database for a photo and description of the person if your agency has one. Check water sources first, even if the person has not shown a propensity to water or their loved one says they don't have an attraction to water. Trust me, check water sources first. Check hot tubs, pools, creeks, lakes, ponds, anything that can hold a few inches of water, because again, that's all it takes. The only time I would say maybe to check other things first would be if a parent says, you know, their child eloped and they always go to the highway because they like cars. Or their child eloped and they always go to the train tracks. You might want to check those places first while also checking for water sources. And recall that you may have to physically lay eyes on a person. Even if they're lost or hurt or hungry, they might not respond to their name. They might actually hide from you. So ask their family about, are they verbal? Will they respond to their name? Is there somewhere special they might have gone? And remember, elopement is not an indicator of bad parenting or neglect. And I'm saying this a lot for a reason. This is Nick, around age 5 or 6, with one of my good friends, coworkers from the sheriff's office. He is posing for a pamphlet. What kind of pamphlet? One for Take Me Home. This is a resource to help law enforcement. There are many types of special needs databases. I'm familiar with Take Me Home, which started in Pensacola, Florida. It is kind of scattered across the nation now, and you can see all the things that it includes and who qualifies and that kind of thing. Currently in Kansas, to my knowledge, this is only available to law enforcement in Johnson County, Kansas, and through Topeka, Kansas Police Department. Wichita Police Department has recently developed a special needs database in conjunction with Heart Springs, which is awesome. They have an autism outreach program. So if you live or work in Wichita, I really encourage you to check it out. Yes, my child eloped and I was terrified and realized other parents needed things like this. So brought this to Johnson County from Pensacola, Florida after the first elopement. Kids with autism, just so you know, are often called Houdinis because they are able to escape from locks or other barriers with really no problem at all. And they're very smart. So, for instance, my son reserved the knowledge that he could unlock a deadbolt until I was occupied. Then he opened the deadbolt and the door and took his little brother and disappeared. Smart kid. Again, who qualifies for Take Me Home? You can see all of these things. There's not an age limit. You just have to have a developmental disability or medical condition, increasing your risk of wandering or getting lost and being unable to identify yourself. So people that wouldn't necessarily go in a database would be people that have just a physical disability only, people that are blind or deaf without a developmental disability, or people that are too young to developmentally be expected to speak, like infants and toddlers without a developmental disability. And yes, I was asked to enter infants into Take Me Home before, but you have to have that cognitive issue piece. If you know or you are a law enforcement officer that wants to bring this program to your jurisdiction, I'm happy to help. Pensacola is willing to share it with agencies all over the nation as long as it's being used for its intended purpose by a law enforcement agency and that citizens are not being charged. So my email address will be at the end of this, and you're welcome to contact me for further guidance. Real quickly, psychiatric comorbidities. This means many people with autism also have mental and behavioral health conditions, and you can see examples on here. So officers often respond on situations involving the population due to, and I saw this a lot, physical or verbal disturbances, a lot of times at home, or physical aggression to themselves or others, suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation. Generally, that means that they're going to have more interactions with law enforcement because law enforcement responds on those types of calls. Quickly, there is no medication for autism. There's no cure for autism. It's a lifelong diagnosis. Medications are used to treat symptoms of other co-occurring mental health challenges or medical conditions. So, like meds for ADHD, impulsivity, anxiety, sleep, seizures, that type of thing. I'd love to know if anyone has seen this, if there's law enforcement officers in the audience. In Kansas, you can now have a code put on your driver's license or state ID. As you can see, it says REST restriction J. And when you turn the ID over, in very tiny things down here, it says restriction J25 cognitive disorder. To do this, you must have a form filled out by a medical professional, though not everybody can do it. There isn't an option to put, say, autism instead of cognitive disorder. And if the person has a driver's license, this does not restrict their driving at all. This is just a cue for, say, an officer that might stop them that they have a cognitive disorder. And this, I think, is great. In Kansas now, you can register your tags. And again, a medical professional has to fill out a form stating that this is needed. And you can receive a decal to put on the lower left-hand corner of your tag right here. That's the interlocking puzzle pieces that are generally associated with autism. So that is what we call a visual cue for officers. You can also get a placard like this to put, either on the driver's side dash or something like that. It just says, hey, the driver has a cognitive disability. Please be patient. We're trying to cooperate, that kind of thing. And I also always encourage, if families don't do something like this, that they get a decal for the back windshield of their vehicle and for windows near their home entrances in case of emergency. It'd be really important to know, for instance, if you're going to, I don't know, a house fire and you see that someone in the home it's posted has autism, you already know from your training that you might have to lay physical eyes on that person and you can't rely on calling out to them to make sure they're okay or that they got out of the home. Our loved ones are already at a higher risk during crisis intervention just due to having autism and difficulty in communication, difficulty with nonverbal communication and understanding gestures and facial expressions. So the fact that they have those communication difficulties makes them at higher risk for a potential bad outcome with law enforcement. If you add in additional minorities like my race, nationality, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, that risk is compounded even more due to implicit and explicit bias. Families have known this for a long time, and we take it as our duty to also educate others about this. It's our responsibility to share this on their behalf. Okay, we are going to watch about a 3-minute video, I believe, and it is involving an officer and a real interaction with someone on the spectrum. Just so you know, it is taken from a news clip because the body cam video was like 30 minutes long, and there are blurred faces. There is some, you can see some subtitles and things so you can understand what's being said. But watch carefully from the beginning because what happens is going to happen quickly.
Sitting when a Buckeye police officer approached.
Yep, it started in the middle. Could everyone hear that?
Yes.
Great. Okay.
Stay down. I'm okay. I'm okay.
Our other big story tonight, the family of a 14-year-old boy with autism claims a cop hurt him after mistaking him for a druggie.
But the Buckeye Police Department released a body camera video saying it shows that their officer did nothing wrong.
Team 12's Kevin Kennedy joins us from the Live Alert Center with the story. Kev?
Yeah, guys, Buckeye police have investigated. They've concluded the officer did not use excessive force. The teen's family, they've seen the body camera video as well and have a much different take, demanding an apology and much more.
On the edge of town, in this quiet part of Verrado, is a park. This is where Connor Liebel was sitting when a Buckeye police officer approached.
What's going on?
Thinking the 14-year-old was sniffing or inhaling some sort of drug, he asks,
What are you doing?
I'm stimming.
What?
What Connor said is he's stimming, a calming technique often used by people with autism. But the officer didn't seem to understand and kept moving forward.
Stop walking away from me.
It's a stream.
That string is what the officer thought Connor was sniffing. Seconds later, it appears Connor tries to walk away. That's when things escalate.
You have any ID on you?
No.
Don't go anywhere. All right, just relax.
Are you okay?
Are you okay? I'm okay. I'm okay.
The teen panicked, the officer holding him down, trying to gain control.
Stop moving.
I'm okay.
Don't you move, you understand?
At one point, Connor asks if the officer will go away. Still on the ground, his caretaker shows up.
He's fighting with me. What's going on? Do you know him?
The officer is a highly trained drug recognition expert, but when it comes to recognizing autism, he seems confused.
He's doing something with his hands or something in his hands. Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Connor's family appalled at the officer's actions, sharing video of their son when he is stimming.
This is Connor's typical routine.
Also releasing a statement. This is a clear example of inadequate training and supervision as you've ever seen. Buckeye police concluding the officer's actions were appropriate, continually saying it all happened so fast.
20 seconds is what we're dealing with here. And the officer had to make that split-second decision when the subject began to walk away from him.
The family also sending 12 News pictures of Connor's injuries. What do you think? Was this appropriate? Maybe the better question is the one asked by the caretaker.
You drove by and you saw him stimming and you thought he was on drugs?
A couple of times, yeah.
You don't know anything about autism, huh?
No.
Buckeye police say this will soon change. More training coming, but this case closed, at least in the eyes of the department.
Now, the family would like the officer to perform community service within the autism community. As for autism recognition training for all officers, the department didn't provide details on how or when that will happen. In the Live Alert Center, Kevin Kennedy, 12 News at 10.